Good morning.
Good morning.
If you're visiting with us today, we are really, truly very glad to have you here with us. We try to be the church that you read about in the Bible that was purchased by the blood of Jesus, made up of all his disciples, redeemed by his blood. We try to be a church that holds up the Bible. And so if you have any questions about the Bible, we invite you, by all means, please stick around afterwards. If you have any questions, we'll do our best to help you understand the Bible a little bit better. And that's what we're going to try and do this morning. Now, last week, I introduced the idea of the biblical narrative. Now, the Bible is made up of many different literary forms. You have epistles or letters. You have books of poetry like the Psalms. And you have books of law that read like a book of law would read, very just, codified rules. But of all of the different literary forms in the Bible, narrative is the most predominant. Nearly half the Bible is written in narrative, just a narration, a literal narration of events. And it's because the Bible and God, through the Bible, is trying to tell us a story. It is important to emphasize book, chapter, and verse. It is important to talk about the details of the Bible. But sometimes I fear that if we don't get high enough above book, chapter, and verse, we miss this story that's over it all. Because these are not 66 books conveniently bound together in one volume, but still separate stories. No, they are 66 books that tell one story over the history of this entire earth. And I want us to understand that story. So if you're here last week, I merely introduced it. And I again want to make clear that when I say things like story or character, I know sometimes we think of like a fairy tale or a story we tell our kids. It's not true, it's made up, or like a movie. I want to be clear, I do think this is real events and real people, and the Bible is recording a literal narrative of what happened. So just keep that in mind as I use words like that. But if we're going to talk about it as a story or like a movie that has a plot and characters, last week was just the teaser or trailer. Oh, and anybody else getting excited for Star Wars? Anybody else see that trailer that just came out last week? When you get a teaser, just a little glimpse of it, you get really excited. So last week, I talked about narrative and that we need to understand and how to understand narrative. And I told you that the Bible is one story, but I didn't really tell you what that story was. Hopefully I left you excited for today. And so today I begin a series of lessons. I'm going to attempt in as short a period, in as few installments as I can, to simply tell the story of the Bible. Like I said, book, chapter, and verse is important, but today we're going to emphasize the other side of the spectrum, the big picture, the biggest picture of the Bible. What's it about? As a young man, I understood stories from the Bible. As a boy, I went to Bible class and I understood the story of Jonah, the story of Noah. But if you were to tell me which came first, or Jesus in the tomb, and 3 days later he rose just like Jonah, I couldn't tell you which story came first. As I grew older, I began to piece it together and understand a little bit of Old Testament as Israel, New Testament as Christians. Then I went to Florida College as a teenager. And I met a couple of men there. Some of my teachers, Goodwin, a Bible class teacher, Ralph Walker, a very involved faculty member. And through some of the classes they taught, I began to grasp kind of this bigger picture. And it really helped me understand that, yes, we need to look at the details, but also we need to take a step back sometimes and say, what is the message God is trying to tell me? What does God want us to know about himself and about us and about our greatest needs? Because you can't just take the parts of the Bible that you like. Sometimes people look at a bag of trail mix like it's M&M's with obstacles in the way. Sometimes people treat the Bible the same way. That we like this verse here, we like this verse here, but everything in the middle, that's not important. You got to take the Bible as a whole. So that being said, the lesson's got to be a little different from normal this morning. And if you'd like to follow along, I'm going to go through the book of Genesis. Our installment for today is the book of Genesis. That's a lot to cover in one lesson. I'm looking at the clock. I'm going to do my best. If you'd like to follow along, I'm not necessarily going to be reading from the text verbatim, but I'm going to have scripture references at the bottom. If you'd like to read along as I go and just read bits and pieces, I quote a little bit here and there, but mostly, let's go through the book of Genesis today and see what God is telling us. Because in the first act of a play, a book, or a movie, we get the introductions. We learn who the characters are, we learn a little bit about them, and that's what we get in Genesis. Why is the Old Testament so important for us today, even though we're New Testament Christians? Because in the Old Testament, you learn who God is. You learn about God. And in the Old Testament, what is he trying to tell us? He's trying to tell us, this is me. This is who I am. If you want to know about me, I'm revealing myself to you right here. You know, when we go back to the beginning, scientists come up with lots of theories, mostly involving some sort of Big Bang. Science is simply observing things and testing things and trying to recreate through experimentation and creating theories about what is observed. And that is the fault of science. Science will come up with some explanation about a Big Bang, and you say, well, what caused that Big Bang? Well, a bunch of positive energy and negative energy collided and condensed and then exploded. And where did that positive and negative energy come from? And well, if they give you an answer for that, you keep asking them, where did that come from? Science can never give you an ultimate origin. Basic rules of science tell us, in physics, we say thermodynamics. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. Something cannot come from nothing. That's what science tells us. Nobody observed the creation of everything. And science tells us that, that's a basic rule. But yet, everything's here, isn't it? Everything's here. We're here. This earth is here. The stars in the sky are there. It had to come from somewhere, and science can't answer that. So we go to the Bible, and the very first words give us the answer we're looking for. In the beginning, God. And there's your answer. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, this is our beginning. That's part of God being eternal. And that's hard to understand, isn't it? We're immortal, you and I. Our soul and our spirit will live on, but we're not eternal. Because this is our beginning. God alone possesses eternity. He is eternal. We're immortal. We live on, but God has no beginning. We do. And that's what Genesis tells us about. That's what that word Genesis means. It's a book of beginnings, and so it's a fitting place to start as we tell the story of the Bible, is it not? And so we go back to this. We try to picture what was it like before this world. It hurts my hand to think too hard about that. God created the heavens and the earth. God created this earth, and on day one, he said, let there be light, and there was light. The sun didn't come until day 4, as far as I understand the scripture, so what was this light? I think it was God. He was the light. And this, it had to have been beautiful. This blue ball, floating in nothing, surrounded by nothing. And God spoke, and there it was. Why do you think the Bible tells us and describes the creation in such words? That God said, and then it happened. Maybe he's trying to tell us that when I speak, my words are powerful. So we need to pay close attention to his word. When he speaks, look at what happens. And so day 2, we talk about this Old Testament, this New King James word, this, older King, King's English word, the firmament, some modern translations say expanse. It says he separated the waters below from the waters above. And boy, the world must have been very different back then. It's hard to grasp this. But what it sounds to me like is the water was separated. There was water on the outer layer of the atmosphere. And it says a little bit later on in Genesis that it didn't rain. But a mist used to settle over the earth, and that's how the plants got their water. This must have been very different for Adam and Eve in those first couple of generations before the flood. By the way, that becomes significant in Genesis 6 when the floodgates from below and the floodgates above were opened. This world is very different. Day 3, he creates the dry land. And so, we're not trying to hide anything. You look at a globe and you take the continents and they fit together like a puzzle piece. I'm trying to imagine what this creative process was like for God. It says the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the earth. Is that telling us that maybe God was very hands-on at this point? That you got this blue planet, and then he creates this land out of it, and it's one solid mass, and he kind of breaks it up into little pieces and starts moving it around the way he likes, and he's forming this earth, and vegetation starts to grow. And here's where some people try to keep and harmonize some of the ideas of evolution, and my opinion is you either got to keep the Bible as a true narrative and leave evolution out of it, or you got to stick with evolution and think the Bible is not accurate. Some people say that each day was not one literal day, but it was billions or billions of years. Okay, you got plants on day 3. Billions of years later, on day 4, you've got the sun. Don't plants need the sun to live? Photosynthesis. What else do plants need to pollinate? They need bees, right? It's not for another billion years later until day 5. So how do these plants survive for billions of years without sunlight or birds and bees and insects? I think we're talking about there was day, there was night, the first day. These are literal days. And so on day 4, God put the sun, the moon, the stars, light, sources of light for us, and things for signs. We look at the stars, and we see the North Star, and people can still, to this day, navigate to some degree with accuracy the ocean, simply by looking at the ever-steady North Star. And the seasons come and go, and we see that the moon and the sun are at different places in their orbit throughout the year. And so, what was this like? Did God just have a handful of stars and throw them out there and see where they landed? When I read Genesis, it just leaves me wondering what this all was like. I have so many questions. Day 5, we've got birds in the sky and fish in the sea. And day 6, that's a very important day in this creation because God said, let's put something on the land. Let's create all these animals and ultimately culminating in us. Let us make man in our image and in our likeness. Let us create him, male and female. And so God created us, and we're meant to be different from the other animals. God is spirit, and so we have a spirit. Something that I don't think the animals quite have. Makes us different, makes us more resembling of our Father. And I think that's kind of an interesting dichotomy in this story, that he fashioned Adam from the dust of the ground, but then God breathed into him his spirit, telling us that we are flesh and bone, but we are also spirit. We're eternal, we live on, we're immortal, I should say. We live on in our spirit, but we got one foot in this world too. We came from the dust of this earth, we're made from this stuff here, but God says your part of me is in you too. And thus everything was created to you. When you read this story, when you read Genesis chapter 1, do you notice that it says, after every day, that God looked at what he created and said, it's good. This is good. When he created everything, we created all the animals, he said, this is good. And at the end of Genesis chapter 2, when he creates the woman, he looks at everything, he says, very good. Each part is good, but put together, everything together is very good. You know what God is telling us there? When I gave you this world, it was good. It was good. So when we look around and see problems, we look around and see things that are bad, we can't point the finger at God, because when he gave things to us, when he handed the keys to us, things were good. Things were very good. Genesis chapter 2, as we move along, as I understand Genesis chapter 2, I believe this is kind of, Genesis 1 is here's, day 1 through 6, God rested on day 7. There's all in one chapter, but let's spend a little more detail, because aren't we concerned? Aren't we a little curious about the creation of man? Don't we want a little bit more information than just fashioned from the dust of the ground and there was Adam? So Genesis 2, I think, gives us a little more detail about creating man. And so he starts to give Adam places in this garden we call Eden, an earthly paradise, a lush and beautiful garden. And he starts giving Adam some directions. I want you to take care of the gardens. I want you to tend to the garden. He has some work to do, and God says, I'm going to bring the animals in front of you. You're going to name them. Why was that? Well, when you name something, I've got an idea. When you name something, you feel like you have a little more responsibility for it. When it was time for Jess and I to go to the hospital for our baby to be born, we didn't ask the doctor, what's her name? We gave her that name. She might not even like that name. She hasn't told me otherwise. Jess and I gave her that name, and so we feel responsible for it, and it attaches us to her in a more personal way. Maybe that's what God is doing with that. Why don't you give them names to feel a sense of responsibility and taking care of them? But something was really drawn to light. God said it is good, but there was something that was not good. And that thing that was not good was really emphasized as all these animals came before Adam. Do you think God was trying to tell him something and tell us something? That for all these animals that came, Adam began to realize, here's a tiger, I'll call it a tiger. It's got a tigress with it. And for all these animals, he started to see They're couples. Each animal has a companion, has a mate. He looks around and says, there's none for me. I can't find one for me. Each of these animals, they have someone, but I don't. And that's when God said it is not good for man to be alone. I don't think God was ignorant enough to think, I'll make man and not create woman. I think that was God's design all along. But why did he create Eve right away? Maybe because he wanted us to realize that man by himself is incomplete. And so we had the first surgery. The first surgery. He puts him in a deep sleep, takes a rib, and he closes up that spot behind him, and from that rib fashions the woman and took his breath away. I'd love to know what these two people look like. This has bothered me since I was a little kid. They have belly buttons. Think about that. Like I said, when I read Genesis, I get questions. This really piques my interest. And so you have the garden, you have the man and the woman. And so this is really the foundation of everything that should exist today. This is the family as God wants it, as God intended it to be. A man and a woman, it says there in Genesis 2 that they shouldn't be attached to their parents, they should be attached to one another. The two shall become one flesh, and what God has joined, they shouldn't be separated. I know circumstances don't make that possible for everybody, but that's what God intended. A man and a woman, you got mom and dad, and you got the kids, and that's the family, the way God designed it, created it from day one. And thousands of years later, every time people ask Jesus about divorce, he said, no, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. As time and circumstance happens to all of us, but we see God's intention. And isn't that beautiful? Everything's good. Until we get to chapter 3. Until we get to chapter 3. And that serpent comes along. Now God gave Adam some instructions. Here's what you're supposed to do, but he also gave him some warnings. He says, you can eat from all the trees of the garden freely, you may eat. Except there's this one tree here. And I want you to trust me on this, Adam. Don't eat this. Don't eat from this tree. Trust me. That was the rule. But then the serpent comes along. And you know what? All of the details about temptation and sin, they might change for you and I. But Satan uses the same formula that he did back then with Eve. He tries to turn us against God. He comes to Eve, and he says, did God really say this? Did God really say you can't eat from that one tree? You know what he's doing? He's trying to make it seem like God is restricted. Did God that's ridiculous. Did God actually say you can't eat from this tree? And you know what? He's starting to get to her. He's starting to get into her head, because what is her answer in Genesis chapter 3? Well, the Lord said we may eat of any tree of the garden except for that one. It's almost a word-for-word quote from what God told Adam in chapter 2, but there's one word missing. God told Adam, you may eat freely. You may eat freely. God was emphasizing that you can have all that you want. All the bananas, all the mangoes, all the oranges. You can have as much as you want. Eat freely. But then when Eve responds, you can tell her thought process is maybe God is keeping something from you. She doesn't say, from all the trees we can eat freely. She just says, from all the trees we can eat. And so once Satan knows he's getting in her head, he just outright lies. You surely won't die if you eat this. Have you ever seen this depicted in a movie? This scene in the garden. It was probably wrong. Because I don't think Eve is standing right under this tree. She says from the tree in the middle of the garden. She doesn't say from this tree. She says the tree over there in the middle. And something else that I think a lot of people get wrong, she wasn't by herself. Because when she goes to eat, it says she took and ate and gave some to her husband with her. Adam was standing right there all along, watching this happen. Maybe he was just kind of sitting back waiting and seeing, well, maybe I'll let this play out. And if she doesn't die, then I'll try something. What we get here in chapter 3, and this is very important to the story of the Bible, another introduction, another character, if you will, storyline is sin. We see the ugliness of sin here in chapter 3. What are the consequences? When God shows up on the scene at the end of chapter 3 and gives out some consequences, I want you to notice what happens when you read through Genesis chapter 3. What is the result of this sinful behavior? Sin separates and from man. Do you think after they were booted from the garden, Adam and Eve were probably, we ought to talk about what just happened. Eve's like, thanks for standing up for me. Adam's probably like, well, you ate us out of house and home. So, at least nobody can say I didn't listen to my wife. They probably had a little bit of a problem to work out here. It created a wedge between them because when God showed up, what happened? And Eve said, well, the serpent, he tricked me. And then, well, Adam, what's your version of the story? That woman you gave me did this. Do you think there was a little bit of, okay, we've got some marriage problems we need to talk about. And then God forced them out of the garden. Put a guard there with a flaming sword and said, you can't come back. When we read about it, it sounds like God used to walk around the garden. I don't know if it was really the full glory of God, like he told Moses, no one can see my face and live. But in a very real way, it seems that God had a much more personal relationship with Adam and Eve than exists today. And so the result of sin was separation from God, from each other and from God. And that's what sin does today. Satan uses the same tricks. He turns us against God, thinking we know best and thinking God is trying to keep something from us. But at the end of the day, when we do sin, inevitably we all will, it's the same effect. We drive a wedge between person and between us and God. Same damaging consequences today. And so, childbirth is a little more complicated. Work to put food on the table is a little more complicated. And that brings us to chapter 4. Very sad story. I think a very sad chapter in this story. After they leave the garden, they have some children. They have Cain. A little while later, they have Abel. And again, we see the consequences, the ugly face of sin. When Abel offers his sacrifice from his flocks and Cain from his produce of the ground, God says, I like Abel's sacrifice. And Cain gets all upset about this. And God says, Cain, it's no big deal. This is the sacrifice I want. So if you just do this, we're good. There's no problem. But Cain's response, and here is sin. Here's sin. We know what he does. He can't just do it better next time. He's mad. He's jealous. He's angry that his little brother showed him up. My brother should tell you all about that. And so he kills his brother. This is what sin does. God gave us a very good world. Here's what we did. This is what the story is so far. It's very sad. A little while later, we get through the end of chapter 4. It talks about Cain had some descendants, and people ask, where did Cain's wife come from? Well, God doesn't tell us all the details, but you know what? He did tell Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. I bet they did. They probably had lots of kids, grandkids, great-grandchildren. They lived for such a long period of time, it's hard to really figure all this out, but there were probably plenty of other people in the world at this time. Or at least the time when Cain got married. There were women. And so we read in the rest of chapter 4 about some of the descendants of Cain. In chapter 5, Adam and Eve have another son named Seth. And we read about his descendants. Cain's descendants, they're a little more worldly. Seth's descendants, well, they're a little more God-fearing. And so you have kind of two really divergent lines of people. But then we get to Genesis chapter 6. And it says, we'll talk about this a little bit tonight. So I talked about the teaser trailer. Come back tonight. We've got some questions we're going to address tonight. One of them is about Genesis chapter 6 and verse 4. Sons of God marry the daughters of men. What I see happening here is the inevitable outcome of God-fearing people and those who don't fear God. When they marry together, what's the resulting generation? They don't fear God. That's the inevitable outcome. When you have people that love God and people that don't marry together, it's really hard. It's really hard for that resulting generation to have a fear for God. And that's what happens. And we get to Genesis chapter 6, and maybe a little bit of hyperbole here, but it says, every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Maybe a little bit of hyperbole there, but it tells us that God was really sorrowful. And there was a guy who had a good family. It's Noah. So God tells him, you're going to build an ark, and for like 100 years or so, he's working he and his family were working on this boat. I don't know if it was even rained up to this point. They didn't even know what rain looked like, maybe. And for 100 years or so, Noah's telling everybody and warning them, I'm building this because God's going to send his judgment of water. Nobody listened. Nobody listened, so only 8 people, 2 of every animal, and I guess 7 of every clean animal, that's all that was saved in Genesis chapter 6. 40 days and 40 nights, the waters came down. And a lot of people say, how could God kill so many people? How could God destroy so many lives? My answer to that has always been, this story to me is never about all the people God destroyed. It's about the 8 people that were worth it to God, that were valuable to God to preserve lives. That's what this story is about. This story is about the mercy of God. And it's through water that Noah and his family were saved. Hold on to that till we get to the New Testament in this series of lessons. There's a lot of foreshadowing in the first act of this story. 150 days, the water prevailed on the earth. And if you look at the details, there's some neat stuff in the details. The ark was 30 cubits from bottom to top. It says the water went up to the top of the mountains and then 15 cubits higher. Most boats won't sink more than halfway. 30 cubits, it's probably only 15 cubits. And the water level is 15 cubits above the highest mountains. The ark is going to sail smoothly over those mountaintops. God knew what he was doing. God knew what he was doing when he gave Moses these instructions, or Noah these instructions. 150 days, the water prevailed, and I think 150 more days for the water to slowly decrease until it settled down on the mountain of Ararat. And then we read about Noah's descendants. Ham, Shem, and Japheth. One of those had a pretty good line of descendants, and among those was Abraham. And we're getting to him very shortly. But there's one more rebellion I have to talk about. And just think about this. Genesis chapter 11. Just think about these first 10, 11 chapters. The first 2 chapters, God gave us something good, and then from there on, the story is about us and what we did wrong. You got the rebellion of Adam and Eve, their sin in the garden. You got the sin of Cain, his jealousy and his anger, and ultimately killing his brother. Genesis 6, you got the sins of all the world. Even after Noah, you've got his sins. The first thing Noah did was plant a vineyard, make wine, and get drunk. Even Noah, the good guy, sinned. You get to Genesis chapter 11. God told Noah, said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. That means spread out. But they get this idea, let's build this tower in the plain of Shinar. And this really giant tower, and I guess they had the same idea a lot of people have today. Big government is good, right? So let's all stay together. And so when people would see this from afar off, in this empty plain, they'd see a tower, say, that looks man-made, let's go to it. It was a beacon calling people to stay in one place, when God's orders were to spread out. So, as they're building this tower, God confuses their language. Now that's really weird to think about. It isn't just that God gave them a new language to speak, so they couldn't even understand the language they had grown up speaking. That's pretty neat to think about. One guy's handing a brick to another and says, hand me that brick over there. And he says, what? I don't understand you anymore. So the people who spoke kind of similar languages gathered together and eventually started to spread out because they could understand each other. And so God accomplishes his intended will, that people spread out. And so this was many thousands of years ago, and I think that's really, as people dispersed, they settled in certain areas of the world, and different cultures developed, and I think different physical features developed among these people depending upon where they lived. And that's kind of how the world, over a period of time, after this point, began to be populated. Some of those people from Genesis chapter 11 settled down in Mesopotamia, and one of those guys who settled there was Abraham. We knew him as Abraham at first. He had a wife named Sarai. For various reasons, God would change their name to Abraham and Sarah. Their names had a lot more significance than we have to ours today. And at 75 years old, that's the scripture Cody read for us in Genesis 12. Very important. And I think there's a reason God chose this man. Abraham was the father of faith, the father of all the faithful, because he is probably the best example we have of faith from a human being. He trusted in God. At 75 years old, he left his own country and went somewhere foreign. At 75 years old, in Genesis 12, he was told, you're going to have a lot of descendants. more than the stars in the sky. He's 75. His wife has never been able to have children up to this point. Seems pretty far-fetched, but he believes. Your name is going to be great. You're going to have this land. I'm going to give you the land of Canaan. That would be their physical territory. And then, most importantly, hold on to this for next week. In your seed, one of your descendants, through your descendants, all nations will be blessed. This is God telling us our greatest problem is sin, and God is going to be setting some things in order, telling us, I'm taking care of your problem. I'm going to send somebody. It's going to be a descendant of Abraham. I want to flash forward to Genesis chapter 22. A lot of things happen. Abraham is getting older. He's getting up near 80, 90 years old. Still doesn't have a child. So they get the bright idea. Sarah says, take my handmaiden Hagar. And the more I read the story, I'm starting to kind of change a little bit. I actually think Hagar is an incredible story. She's a great woman. She had great faith, and she was really treated poorly by Sarah. Yes, there's examples of polygamy in the Bible, but it never worked out good. Never worked out good. So it's not an endorsement. God says, no, you weren't supposed to have a child with Hagar. That was Ishmael. God says, Ishmael will still have lots of descendants, but no, the promise is going to come through Sarah. Abraham laughed at that, Sarah laughed at that, but they had a child. When Abraham was 100, she was 90, and his name was Isaac, which means one who laughs. Their names had significance. He waited 100 years to get a son. That's a long time. Do you think he loved him? Genesis 22. Let's flash forward to Genesis 22, and God is again trying to tell us something here. He says, Abraham, why don't you take your son, whom you love, go up to a mountain, put him on an altar, and kill him. Offer him as a sacrifice to me. And here's Abraham, the faithful. Side note, you ever notice that the most faithful men and women in the Bible were also the most obedient? At the end of Genesis 6, it says, thus Noah did all that God commanded him. He had faith, but so that faith is obedience. Abraham woke up early the next morning and left. He didn't put it off. He woke up early, and he shows his faith when he tells the servants, you wait here. The boy and I are going to go worship, and we will come back. Abraham knew he might have to kill his son because he would do what God asked of him, but he also knew that when God makes a promise, he's not going to back out. He knows that God promised that through his son Isaac, there would be a great nation and a blessing for all the world. He was going to obey God, but also, and why do we study the Bible? Because it tells us who God is. God is a promise keeper. And Abraham knew that. Abraham knew, if I do offer my son, having probably never seen someone raised from the dead, he says, I can't limit God. He can bring him back for me. And so just think about how heart-wrenching this story is. And how hard must this have been? Probably not a word spoken between these two. And then finally Isaac says, here's the wood. You don't prepare the fire. Knife in the heart for Abraham right there in that shift. You know what Abraham says? In verse 8, God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering, my son. I tell you what, that has more significance than just this story. You know how this goes. Abraham puts his son Isaac on the altar, raises the knife, he's ready to do it, and as he starts, the angel calls out and says, stop. You are a man of faith, and we know that now. And I don't think God needed to know this for himself. I think God wanted us to have this story to know what faith is. But again, this phrase has more significance. God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering. God wants us to understand the cost of our redemption. He wants us to put ourselves in the place of Abraham, as a father, as a mother, to think about putting your own child and ending their life. Abraham was spared that pain. And God says, when it's my turn, there won't be a replacement. There won't be a ram to compensate it. I'm going to go through with it. That's the cost. If we want to understand God, he tries to relate to us in ways we can understand. He's trying to tell us, this is the cost. This is what it's going to cost you. This is the pain it's going to cost to save you. Powerful story. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons through 4 different wives, by the way. Again, The Bible is pretty clear on polygamy. No man can serve two masters, but it didn't work out so good. Rachel hated Leah. Rachel hated Leah in this story. And so it just never worked out. Where Leah and Rachel were butting heads, and so each of them gave their handmaiden, and so through 4 different women, he has 12 sons and a daughter. I feel sorry for her, one daughter, 12 brothers, but and he loves one son more than the other. And so his older brothers despised him. And again, ask my brothers what that's like. It's hard to be the one that your parents like the most. But he loves Joseph. And so, as older brothers do, they pick on their little brother. Now, my brothers never carried it this far. They wanted to kill him. At least Reuben was smart enough and kind enough, if that's the right phrase, to say, no, we can't kill him. He's our own brother. So they did the next best thing and sell him to some Ishmaelites. Take the money, take his coat, cover his blood, and say, Dad, your son is dead. Oh, that is harsh. That is harsh. And Joseph is one of those amazing characters in the Bible. He's one of those amazing people. He's a real person. He's amazing. For all the bad that happens to him, he never gives up, he never despairs, and he never quits on God. As a slave, he works hard and is recognized until his master's wife turns against him. He's thrown in prison. And he rots in prison for a long time and still works hard and trusts in God. And eventually Pharaoh has some disturbing dreams. And one of Pharaoh's servants says, hey, I met a guy in prison who interprets dreams with the help of the mighty God. Long story short, I think Alexander Dumas probably based the Count of Monte Cristo on this story here. Sold as a slave, basically written off as dead. You are dead to us, we will never see you again. He ascends to power. The most powerful man in all the world, except probably for Pharaoh above him. And then a famine comes, and because of Joseph's wisdom, Egypt is the only place that has food. So everybody's coming to Egypt, including Joseph's brothers. What would you do in that situation? What kind of payback would you scheme up? That would be such a sweet opportunity for vengeance, but this is one of the most beautiful stories in the whole Bible. He cried so loudly that drew all kinds of attention, even from Pharaoh. There was no anger, there was no hatred, there was no bitterness. He's happy to see his brothers. That's a beautiful story. And he tells them, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. I want you to bring your families, bring your wives, bring your children. I'm going to take care of you. I've got food. I've got a place for you to live. It doesn't matter what you did to me. Come back. I'll take care of you. And I think this is going to be a good place for us to stop. This is foreshadowing. What did Israel do to Jesus? They put him on the cross. They put him to death, his own friend. Yet Jesus says, I'm here to save. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, that I might save many people. And that's the story of the Bible. We just get the first act this morning, but it sets the stage for what's to come. God is providing for us a Savior. And it's much like these stories. Much like Abraham putting his son on the altar, God would give his own son to pay the price. And much like Joseph, who was treated so poorly, yet only returned with kindness and mercy. If Abraham is the greatest example of faith, Joseph is the greatest example of mercy. And this is the story of how God loves us. So I want to invite you at this time, take out your songbooks. Any part of this story, as we continue it next week, is touchdown. You are starting to understand and see that God created things and intended good things for us, but given free will, we inevitably chose to reject Him. And He still longs to redeem us. If there's any way we can help you to know your Redeemer, to know Him, to take advantage of the forgiveness of sins that is freely offered and freely given for you. If there's any way we can help you come forward as we stand and sing.